Good evening. I'm just going to introduce myself before I get into it. My name's Bob Rice. I was a police officer with the Port Authority Transit Police of New Jersey and Pennsylvania, which is we had the bridges, the trains, and the ferries. We had a couple different things. We were actually taken over by the Delaware River Port Authority back in 2002. So I was there for 23 and a half years. I was injured on duty in 2006 and forced to retire. And I went out on a pension. And we moved down here 4 years ago. We're actually down in Robeson County, down in Roland, near south of the border. But that whole thing's just another story for another day. So where did this all start? How did I wind up here today? First, before I do this, let's go before the Lord. This is really hard for me sometimes to do, so I'm going to just go before the Lord and just, Lord God, we just thank you, Lord, for the honor of being here in this church tonight, Lord, to be able to share with these wonderful people of what you did in my life, Lord, back in 2001. And I pray, Lord, that everything that comes from my mouth is blessed by you, Lord, and it glorifies you. And we pray, Lord, that someone here may hear something that I say, Lord, and most of all, Lord, we're here to make people remember, Lord, and to never forget what happened 18 years ago, Lord. Just thank you, Lord, in everything you do. We pray this in your Son's precious name. Amen. All right. Started that off good. So back in 2002, I was contacted by a lady named Lisa Chilson Rose, who asked me if I would consider speaking at a service that was being held at the Metropolitan Baptist Church in Manhattan, New York. I'd never really spoken publicly anywhere and actually hated and feared it, but I agreed. Later, Lisa would put together a book about the lives changed by 9/11, and my story, our story, was one of the many in the book. Little did I know where this would lead to. I began to get calls from throughout the country asking me to speak at churches who were holding 9/11 memorial service. And the same question was always in my mind. My words were, why me? I was a nobody. I was an ordinary person who chose to be a cop, and when the time arose, I did what I felt I had to do. But I would realize later that people needed to know what happened to me in New York following the attack at the World Trade Center, as well as the stories of the many, many more people, many of whom are no longer living. The Word of God is pretty simple about this issue, as it is with every other aspect of our lives. In Romans 10:14, it says, How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him who they have not heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? Acts 1:8 says, But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witness in Jerusalem, and all Judea and Samaria, and to the end of the earth. I understand this is by no means about me and what I did or continue to do. This is about the Holy Spirit of God coming upon me and sending me out to tell people what God has done in the life of this sinner saved by grace. So today I stand before you to share what happened on 9/11/2001. And what happened in the months to follow, and to this day it still continues, only by the grace of God and His love. And the question always pops up. There have been books written about it. Where was God on 9/11? So sit back and get comfortable. I share what I experienced and reveal what exactly God was on 9/11 and the days and months following. September 1st, 2001, 18 years ago today. My background. The only religion I was exposed to was Catholic Church. I was forced to go as a child, made my first Holy Communion. Don't really remember much about it. My parents fought a lot around me and my two sisters. They separated a few times and eventually divorced. My father had custody of all three of us. He was a New Jersey State Trooper. Worked a lot. We spent a lot of time with sitters, family, and his girlfriends. And then he remarried eventually. But he accepted Jesus Christ as his personal Savior about 10 years ago and continues to walk with God. And 2 years ago, he married the love of his life when he was 16 years old. He's now 81. They reunited last year. Through me, through Ancestry.com, she tracked me down, and they hadn't been trying to find each other for years. And they were married 2 weeks after they got back together again. So they're loving life again. So he accepted Christ, and they're doing great. And he continues to walk with the Lord. I grew up in the 70s, and if you've seen the TV show, the 70s shows, that's really how it was. That's what we did back then. I got into the drug and alcohol scene for a bit with my friends and eventually moved out of my house at 17, moved in with my girlfriend and her family. I married in early 1983, and that ended in divorce in 3 years. A son was the only good thing that came out of that relationship. I met my wife Kim during the divorce process, and we married in 1991. And I have here celebrated our 27th. We celebrated our 28th anniversary this year, this past May. We also have another son, and God blessed us with our precious little girl. I don't see her in here, Faith. She's 10 years old, and God blessed us with her in 2008. We adopted her at 3 months old, and we had our little girl. So we have a 10-year-old, a 32-year-old, and a 29-year-old. God has a sense of humor. I graduated from the Camden City Police Academy in 1985, worked for a few years in a small town called Summerdale, and was hired by the Port Authority in 1998, and in 2006 I was injured. Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. No different than any other day. It was a beautiful, sunny day. Sun was shining. It was warm. Nothing special about it, but that would soon change. Certain dates in history have a dramatic impact on our lives, like the day that President Kennedy was assassinated. Everyone remembers exactly what they were doing that day. And September 11th, 2001 will become another day. Everyone will remember exactly what they were doing, especially at 8:45 a.m. I was a port officer with the Port Authority Transit Police Department, and on this particular day, the Port Authority Transit Corporation, PATCO, which were the trains where I worked, was taking part in a disaster drill in the city of Camden, New Jersey. And ironically, the drill was to be a staged terrorist attack on our train system, and it would involve a sarin gas attack on our train system and the train stations in the middle of Camden City, which is the county seat in that county. I was working at police headquarters this day and would be answering the phones and working the radio during the drill. Anyway, we're getting ready to start the drill. Everybody from emergency services are in the area, will be involved. Actors will be playing victims along with the makeup and to portray injuries. Everything to simulate a terrorist attack on the train. I was in the patrol room when I overheard my lieutenant, Ray Meany, tell one of the sergeants on the radio, turn KYW on. KYW is our local news station. I walked into his office and heard the newscaster on KYW talking about a plane crashing into the World Trade Center in New York. A television set was being set up in my chief's office. Thinking that KYW was involved with this drill, I just chalked it up to my lieutenants taking an extra step for realism, as he was known to do. And I said, wow, you even had KYW involved with this drill? To that I replied, no, it's not part of the drill. Look. I looked at the television and could not believe what I was seeing. The tower was on fire. As we watched TV, we realized that the drill was still set to go off in just minutes. Lieutenant Meany contacted the people coordinating the drill and told them to cancel the drill due to what was taking place in New York City. At first, they danced around the idea, telling it was already planned, and they were going to continue the drill. And Lieutenant Meany could be overheard as he told them, look, you don't understand. We're not sending you a train, so you can't hold the drill. So can you imagine where New York City's under attack, and they're going to stage a terrorist attack in the middle of Camden City, just outside of Philadelphia. I looked at television. Oh, it's already said that. I'm sorry. Can you imagine the World Trade Center is under attack, and that would be taking place? Anyway, the drill was canceled. We went on high alert and began calling all the officers into work to protect our facilities. I was on the phone with my wife when Tower 2 was hit at 9:03 a.m. and watched it on TV like everyone else, and we were again talking as it fell at 10:05, followed by Tower 1 at 10:30. At this time, I was also a member of the New Jersey Critical Incident Stress Management Team, or New Jersey CISM team for short. We are a team of volunteer peer counselors that went out on calls to counsel law enforcement, fire, and EMS personnel after they had experienced a critical incident on the job. The team was overseen by Roland Candle. Roland was a paid firefighter in New Jersey, in the city of Vineland, as well as a fire marshal in several towns in Cumberland County. I called Roland and asked if the team was headed to New York, and he said we had not been called yet. But just minutes later, he called back and said that the team had been called by the Port Authority Police in New York, and we were to respond to help counsel their officers. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey operated the World Trade Center, and their police department was responsible for the law enforcement duties. At that time, I, like everyone else, did not know a lot about the Port Authority Police in New York and New Jersey, or PAPD as they're referred to. I knew that they were a much bigger version of our department, got paid a lot more money, and they're also on the East Coast. I would later learn that the PAPD lost 37 officers and a K-9 that day. When the towers fell. If anyone saw the movie that was released with Nicolas Cage, The World Trade Center, you'll see that the two officers that were found alive in the rubble, they were the only two PAPD officers who survived that day. All of the officers were heroes that day, and some were immortalized, such as PAPD officer Chris Amoroso and NYPD officer Morris Smith. If you saw that movie, the World Trade Center, was probably about the most exact depiction of the Trade Center that you can see. The officers were all there while they were filming it, and they actually took them out to the set. And they said when they turned the corner and saw the set, it said it was actually like they were standing in the pit again. It was just incredible. And Will Yamino and John McLaughlin both survived. They're both still alive today. They've since retired, but they still suffer greatly from their injuries. And that movie was done great, except for one thing. So if you ever watch it, the hat that Nicolas Cage wore in the movie was never real until after the Trade Center attacked. He says Port Authority Police on it. So that's the only thing I found wrong with it. I like to pick things apart. That's Chris Amoroso, and that's Morris Smith. She was with NYPD. You see Chris Amoroso, I'm probably jumping ahead of myself, but he's got a pair of gloves on, and it's got the Nike swoosh on it. That there ought to be the spokesman for Nike right there, not that person they have now being their spokesman. He was the one who that day gave up everything and ran into the building. That picture was taken about 20 minutes before the building collapsed and Chris was killed. His body was never found. Morris Smith, there's a radio broadcast that we were hearing early on of a female officer calling for help. She was putting out a 1013, which is an officer needs assistance in NYPD. And you kept hearing her calling, saying, help me, help me. That was Morris Smith. She eventually, obviously, she died. But that was the last picture of her taken. These are two officers that, even though they were both injured at the time, if you see the close-ups of Chris, his face is bleeding, Morris' face is bleeding. They were both injured, but they continued to go back in and get people. And they were killed. NYPD lost 23 officers on 9/11. The loss of officers to the Port Authority Police was the most officers ever lost the department in one day, which was 37. That was more officers killed in one day in the history of law enforcement than any other department, and the one K-9 officer. We also know that the New York Fire Department suffered the loss of 343 brave firefighters that day. I told Roland I was unable to respond immediately due to the high alert status we were on, but I was finally able to head up on Friday. I went up on September 14th. That was the same day you see President Bush standing on the pile with the microphone and the firefighter, and he's talking. That was the same day that we got in. 4 of us headed up from my area. We were members of the team. Myself, my sergeant, Mike Cruther from PATCO, my friend Leo Olshe was from Audubon, New Jersey, and Frank Accardo, who was with Camden County Corrections. We took 2 vehicles and headed up the New Jersey Turnpike. There was no traffic at all on the Turnpike, and once we got farther up north on the Turnpike, we were the only vehicles in sight. And if anybody's ever driven the New Jersey Turnpike, it's never do you see cars not on the Turnpike. It was just eerie being on it. I've never been to the World Trade Center or Jersey City, for that matter, where we headed up to meet Roland at the Port Authority headquarters located at Journal Square. At one point, we could see the skyline, or what remained of the skyline of New York. The smoke coming from the city was still very heavy. We arrived at exit 14. We were met by a state police roadblock. We showed our IDs and tried to get directions to General Square, which is what we were told to go to, not Journal Square. So we kept asking for General Square. That's how we pronounce it. But just like we would find out later, most of the police working the roadblocks had no idea how to get anywhere there. We were in Jersey City, and we saw an officer from our area in Collingswood, New Jersey, directing traffic, and he didn't even know where he was sending people. But these were just officers who were coming in from all over the state to help. At exit 14, we were only about 10 minutes from Journal Square, as we would find out was the true name. But it took us about an hour to finally arrive after receiving wrong direction after wrong direction. I mean, we would ask, famous cops, cops would do the same. Somebody comes and say, how do you get to such and such? Go down the street, make a right, then make a left, and just go straight. That's we would tell them, because you don't have time to talk to people directly. And that's what they were doing with us. They were just going down. And we drove around and around and kept seeing this building with a big neon sign, and it said, Something Trust Company. And we would find out when we arrived, it was directly across the street from Journal Square. We passed them big red letters, I don't know how many times, but we just kept going around and around. We just kept seeing it. We'd come around, and there was that building. It was like that movie, what is it, with Chevy Chase, the Family Vacation, where you say, hey, look, Big Ben Parliament. Hey, kids, Big Ben Parliament. That's all we kept doing. We just kept going around. Anyway, somehow we found our way into Journal Square, and we met up with Roland. Roland explained what the team was doing and had us go out and get our identification cards, which is this card hanging here. And it's kind of funny because this one, they let me keep it. But they were actually issuing us police identification cards, which on the back gives you the right to carry a firearm in the city of New York and New Jersey, which wasn't a problem for me. But a lot of our members are wives and nurses and all, and they're issuing police IDs at the time to people until they realized it. Then they started pulling them back in, but they let us keep ours. But when you needed these IDs were like the Willy Wonka gold ticket. You could go anywhere with this ID. A Port Authority ID was, you could get through any roadblock in New York, in Manhattan. The team would be responsible for all of the PAPD facilities, which included Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia airports, the Lincoln and Holland tunnels, Port Newark, the Goethals, George Washington and Outer Bridges, PATH, which was similar to our PATCO train system, as well as the World Trade Center site. My duties included PATH, Journal Square, and the World Trade Center. We geared up and met with a Port Authority officer who would drive us into Manhattan to the PAPD command post. We piled into a marked Chevy van, Chevy Suburban, that had actually been at the Trade Center during attack. There was no rear windows in it. The windows had been blown out. There was a sheet of plywood in the back covered in glass, and he just piled us into there. We were in the parking garage of the Journal Square. And he said, we started going down. We introduced ourselves to our driver, and the first thing he asked, he says, "Do any of you know how to get to the Holland Tunnel?" I said, "Yeah, right." That's what we said. We just laughed at him. He was from one of the airports. He had no idea where he was or how to get there. But we thought he was just kidding, but then we would find out there was officers from all over the area. We finally found our way, headed lights and siren the whole way, about 70 miles an hour through the Holland Tunnel. Again, not a single car in the tunnel. We were the only one. We arrived to the community college on West Side Highway, where Port Authority police had set up shop in the gymnasium. That's the outside of the gym where they had the tents and tools and everything was outside. I was standing on the steps when I took that picture. It's called CNUY, I believe, Cooney Collard or something like that. The mobile command posts from every agency lined the West Side Highway, as well as an untold number of police, fire, and EMS vehicles. It was nighttime, and large floodlights could be seen farther down the street, lighting up where the World Trade Center once proudly stood. We found our little corner of the world inside the gym, a table with a phone and a handwritten sign that said crisis counselors. Of course, nobody came near the table, and we finally decided to start mingling with the officers on our own. Cops especially, they're just infamous for, they don't talk to nobody. If they think you're any kind of mental health psych, the worst thing, they're worried about losing their gun, so they won't talk to nobody. Firemen were easy. I love talking to firemen. Firemen, you can't shut them up. I mean, they'll ramble on for hours, but it's just cops are tough. So that's why our team was unique. We had about 200 people on our team in New Jersey, and we responded statewide. But we had people on our team that somebody had been involved in shooting, somebody hadn't been involved in a baby death. So when somebody would call and say, "Hey, listen, we got an officer here that was involved in a shooting," we would send a person out that had been involved in a shooting. So we would tailor our people to every call that they went out on. So we're hoping this would help us at the Trade Center. So we struck up small conversations with some of the officers who were not sleeping. A lot of them were just sleeping in corners. And at one point, a PAPD Lieutenant John Brandt, approached us and asked, he says, "Have you been out to the site yet?" And we answered no. And he stated, "How do you expect to talk to my people if you don't even know what they're experiencing out there?" And of course, he was right. We had no idea what they were seeing out there. So the lieutenant told us to suit up, attend a briefing, and he would send us out with the next crew. We went to numerous tables that were around the gym and got all the necessary equipment we would need: helmet, respirator, goggles, flashlights, you name it. They just had tables. It was like an assembly line. You just walk down, they just handing stuff, helmets, like all this stuff like you see right here. We attended the briefing and off we went. But little did we realize that we were being sent off as part of an actual dig crew. They were sending us out with a dig crew to dig. Before we know it, we had picked out our tools and we were headed down West Side Highway, walking towards the pit, as it was referred to. This is a picture somebody had took on me early on. So they outfitted us to go out and actually start digging on the pile, which was not what we were there to do. What we saw in the next few minutes was something that I had not been prepared to see, and only can be described as a scene from hell. If you've ever seen the movie The Terminator, and they showed the end of civilization in the city, that's basically what it looked like there. The whole area was lit with portable floodlights. Rubble and debris were everywhere, along with crushed vehicles, including fire trucks, ambulances, and police vehicles. Remember, this was Friday. The attack was on Tuesday, so everything was still there. Nothing had been taken out yet. They were still putting the fires out. Fires were all over. Fire hoses were spraying from numerous locations, including broken windows of buildings that bordered the pit with dark smoke. Ash raining down on us like snow, and of course the pit itself. I mean, you were just covered in the ash still. I mean, nothing like it was the day of the collapse, but with the water spraying, it was hitting and creating the steam. The steam was coming up, and and it was a nice day that day. So we were in short sleeves like this, and our arms were just covered, our heads, everything. If you didn't have a hat on, it was in your head. It was just horrible. An indescribable pile of twisted steel, smoking and burning debris. The remnants of what were the towers 1 and 2, buildings 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. See, the World Trade Center, some people think it was just the 2 towers. It wasn't. There were actual 7 buildings. There were the 2 towers. There were buildings 4 and 5, which were identical buildings. 5 where the Port Authority police were located. 6 was the customs building where the federals were. 7 was the last building to fall that day. I think it was about 5:30 that collapsed. That supposedly, I don't know if it was confirmed or not, but that's where Mayor Rudy Giuliani had his command post, was in that building, and that one fell at 5:30. We approached the pit from the West Side Highway. We were sent around the back where the docks were, where there was a yacht club back there. If you ever saw the picture of the firemen raising the flag on 9/11, that's what that was. That was the mast of a yacht that was out in the yacht club. They had taken that off of there, and that was that flag that they were raising. That was actually a mast from one of the sailboats. Past the Federal Express building, which was being used as the temporary morgue, the unmistakable smell of dead bodies was heavy in the air. Every time we got close to the edge of the pile, we were moved to another location. Eventually, we circled the entire pit and were told that all the dig crews were being pulled out as the pile had become unstable. I wouldn't realize until months later that God had already been working on me that night. Had I gone into that pit and started digging, I probably would not have lasted but a few days, and most likely would have become one of the people I was sent there to counsel. I spent the next 4 months off and on going back and forth from Jersey City and Manhattan, spending 12 hours a night in the pit with the officers from PAPD. I teamed up with the same crew every night and worked 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I spent all night Friday in Manhattan, mainly at the gym, talking with officers who could now say I knew what they were experiencing out there, having been out to the pit. We slept in our vehicles on the roof of Journal Square that night, worked all day and night Saturday, and headed home Sunday for a break. Me and Mike headed home. We left Leo and Frank in New York. I couldn't wait to get home. We drove almost 90, 100 miles an hour straight down the turnpike, and little did I know what was in store for me. I dropped Mike off and arrived home to my wife, my 2 boys, and my dogs. One of my neighbors across the street came out, and my wife had already told them. I had told her when I was on my way back. I said, please don't tell them to start questioning me about what's going on up there. I really don't want to talk about it. My neighbor came out. She gave me a big hug and cried as she asked, so how was it up there? I could feel myself as the tears welled up, but I held them back, and I told her it was bad. It was really bad up there. My wife Kim came running out wearing a red, white, and blue jacket she had made while I was away. That's the infamous jacket there. As always, she gave me a big hug and a kiss, followed by the kids and the dogs. I took a picture of Kim wearing that jacket, and I kept that picture with me the whole time I was in New York for the next few months. I kept it right over my head, stuck in the dome light in my vehicle. It's stuck right up there. Remember that because it comes up. I went inside to settle in for a few days of rest, which turned out to be 1 day. I headed back up to New York the following day. See, what happens is we would get up there, we would work. You'd be so busy, you really didn't have, time was nothing, but you would miss your family so bad. You would rush home to see them, but then when you're down there, you had to go back again. You just felt guilty about being away. You needed to be back. It just had an attraction. It just pulled you back. You had to go up. So I would come home. I'd be home for a day or two, and I had to go to work and just put some time in to look like I really existed there still. I started checking my emails that day, and somebody had sent an email presentation with pictures from the first day of the attack and a song attached, that Lou Greenwald's song, Proud to Be an American. I sat and watched that clip and started feeling myself beginning to lose it. The tears began rolling down my face, and at the same time, my wife came up behind me and placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "Are you all right?" At that point, I lost it. I began to cry uncontrollably. I remember telling her, "You cannot believe how bad it is up there." While I was there, working and keeping busy, my emotions stayed in check.
When I got home, they all came out. I returned to Journal Square on Monday and met a lady who would become my partner for the whole tour up there in New York, and we became close friends and remain so to this day. I just talked with her today. That's my friend Diana. She was from Wildwood, New Jersey. She was a police dispatcher, EMS, and she became my second wife. In fact, most of the people up there thought we were married at the time until they finally met my wife. We were inseparable while we were there. I began meeting with more people as Roland began calling teams in from all over the country as our people were burning out quickly. See, we were part of the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, which is nationwide. So we were the center point for the CISM teams coming in. So Roland was the contact. So the international was sending teams in from all over the country, Canada. I also began meeting these chaplains that started coming in along with the teams. The first chaplain I met was from McKinney, Texas. His name was Ricky Hargrave. Ricky was a Baptist chaplain. A little I didn't know what an important part of my life Ricky would play in the months to come. Isaiah 6:8 says, "Then I heard the Lord asking, 'Whom shall I send as a messenger to this people? Who will go for us?' I said, 'Here am I, send me.'" These verses meant nothing at the time, but they have such meaning now to me. I spent a short time with Ricky. Then he was sent off to work at the morgue in Bellevue due to his experience when he worked at the 1995 bombing of the Murrah building in Oklahoma. Ricky worked in the morgue in Oklahoma after the bombing in Oklahoma, so they took him down there to help with the families. In the next couple of weeks, I would meet two more chaplains, both from San Bernardino Sheriff's Department in California. Gary Malkus, who is now the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Apple Valley in California, and Ron Nish, a Seventh-day Adventist. So keeping this track of this. I got a Baptist now, I got a Seventh-day Adventist, and I got a Calvary Chapel now. Roland called me in and advised me that he was sending these two chaplains out with us and told me to show them around. I just looked at Roland with this look, and I said, "You've got to be kidding me, right? I don't want to be stuck with these chaplains." Of course, I lost the argument. Nobody argued with Roland, and off we went. I couldn't believe I had to walk around with these two Bible thumpers. I'm telling Diana, I can't believe they got tag along. It was like, all right, come on, guys, let's go. Just follow us. Little did I know at this time, this is where 1 Corinthians 3 starts to take place in my life. After all, who was Apollos? Who was Paul? We are only God's servants, through whom you believe the good news. Each of us did the work the Lord gave us. I planted the seed in your heart, and Apollos watered it. But it was God who made it grow. It's not important who does the planting or who does the watering. What's important is God makes the seed grow. The one who plants and the one who waters works together with the same purpose. We gave the chaplains their tour, and they began working with me and Diana during the night shift. We spent a lot of time together, and the one chaplain, Gary, as he would later say, God put me in his right pocket, but I think it was actually the other way around. Diana and me would introduce these two chaplains to some words they probably had not heard in many, many years, and we didn't even think twice about it at first. Eventually, we would let a colorful word fly out of our mouth, and then we would say, "Oh, sorry, we forgot the chaplains are here with us." And then we tried to calm our language down a little bit. Gary, he decided he was going to teach me replacement words at the time. So every time I let fly a nice, colorful word in his presence, Gary would correct me with a replacement word. That went on for a while until we started to watch, and I would say the words just to pacify him. I would say something, like my wife. My wife still does it with me. She teaches at Christian school. She's a guidance counselor, and I can't say some words that aren't even bad, but she tells the kids, "No, that's not a nice word." So she does the same thing with me. So that's what Gary would do to me the whole time I was talking. He would say, "Bob, your language is just horrible." And I found out later that Gary actually called his wife and said, "Daniil," he says, "you got to pray for me." He says, because Gary was actually a sheriff's officer too. And he says, "I've been around a lot of cops in my time." He says, "But this guy is really pushing my buttons, and I don't know how much more I can take of him." So for a chaplain and a pastor to say that, I was bad. I was bad at the time. We also introduced the chaplains to a new pick-me-up called Red Bull. This is before it really became big like it is down, like all the energy drinks. Red Bull was the first one. They would actually go around with wheelbarrows of this stuff, walking around the trade center, wheelbarrows full of ice, and they were and the chaplains were funny. They started drinking it, and so the one, Ron, he was the Seventh-day Adventist. He was an older gentleman, probably in his 60s at the time, and 70s, but he was drinking these things like crazy, and we finally sent him back home. His wife called us and said, "What did you do to him?" He says he wants these drinks called Red Bulls. He goes, I'm thinking about sending him to like a rehab or something. I don't know what's wrong with him, but he's got hooked on these things. And one day we went back to Journal Square, and I had to take care of some business in the men's room. So, of course, like every guy, I needed some reading material, right? I mean, I'm looking around for something to read, and Ron hands me this little book. It's called the Book of John. He hands it to me. I was like, whatever. Because you don't really read it. You kind of just sit there and like thumb through it just to get your mind off of things. So I took the book and went on my way. I came out, and Ron says, so, Bob, he says, what do you think? I say to Ron, I said, Ron, I like reading a lot, but that book makes no sense to me whatsoever. I don't understand it. Ron tells me, that's because you have to ask God to help you understand it. You have to pray. So my reply to Ron was, pray. How do you pray? So Ron tells me, you just got to talk to God. Talk to him like you're talking to a friend. I said, okay, that makes sense, I guess. A little while later, Gary comes walking down the hallway, and I tell Gary what Ron told me about the book and that Ron told me how to pray. Well, Gary gives me this look, and because they were always watching each other. You get the Calvary Chapel and the Baptist. They all have their different ways, of course. The denominations are all different. So he's like, okay, what's the Seventh-day Adventist telling Bob to do, right? So he says, oh, yes, what did he tell you to do? I tell Gary, I said, he told me to just talk to God like I was talking to one of my friends. Well, Gary was drinking a soda and he almost choked. And he replied, absolutely not, Bob. You cannot talk to God the way you talk to your friends. I'm telling you that right now. So another night we're walking around the site when Gary notices me checking out the volunteers walking around. Now, this was 18 years ago, so I was younger. So they had a lot of young ladies walking around like the Hooters girls and the t-shirts tied and handing out food and drinks to the guys. So of course, I'm with the guys, and at one point they gave me their video camera, the crew dinner, the video, and of course the girls were walking around. So I'm filming like Action News, and I'm just filming everybody walking around. So Gary's looking at me. Finally, he says he says, "Let me ask you something, Bob." He said, "What's the one food in the world that you hate?" And I said, "That's an easy one." I didn't miss a beat on it. We were just walking past a group of volunteers at a portable McDonald's stand on the street. I said, "Chicken McNuggets." I hate those things. They're not even real meat. I said, I got drunk one night and I had them to eat afterwards. And a short time later, I threw them up along with the Sambuca I'd been drinking. To those who don't know, Sambuca has a strong licorice taste and smell. And to this day, I can't even smell a black jelly bean. I can't. It just turns my stomach. And of course, my wife loves them. The funny thing is, it was my 21st birthday. So the funny thing is that the bartender at the bar was a friend of mine. He was feeding me these drinks, and they were called, which again, that time it meant nothing to me, but the name of the drink was a Pontius Pilate. Right? See, the guy was like working on me way back when, and I had no idea. So it was like, I think it was Tanqueray gin and Sambuca on the top, and they lit the thing on fire, and we were doing these flaming shots, but it was just crazy. So anyway, I got sick to my stomach, and I was throwing up all over. So I tell Gary, Chicken McNuggets. Gary says, okay. He says, back in the truck, you have that picture of your wife stuck in the dome light. He says, and that's prime rib. He says, and these girls around here, he says, they ain't nothing but Chicken McNuggets. I looked at him, I was like, yeah, okay. So after this, every time one of the volunteers would be walking by, and I'd start to turn my head, I'd look over at Big Gary, he'd just be shaking his head like this and saying, Chicken McNuggets. This would go on and on until I finally, it's just like the language, I just got tired of hearing. So I'd catch myself, I'd start to go like, and I'd stop and look at him, and he'd just smile, and I was like, I know, Chicken McNuggets. And that was it. So that cured me of that. This guy was really working on me. So on the evening of September 22nd, a new chaplain arrived from San Bernardino. He was also a sheriff's officer in San Bernardino. His name was Greg Smith. Greg was a Baptist, another Baptist. And Greg would have a very special part in my life later on also. We were in between buildings 4 and 5. When one of the PAPD lieutenants came down and asked Ron to come up with him. Ron walked up to his makeshift command table and spent a short time there and returned. We asked Ron what he was doing at the table, and he told us they had located a PAPD officer in the ruin of the stairway of Tower 2. That's him there. That's Clinton Davis. Just a side note, the lieutenant that I referred to at the beginning that I met, Lieutenant Brandt, this is the same lieutenant again. Lieutenant Brandt died July of 2018 of stomach and throat cancer, 1 month after he was diagnosed. which was being attributed to the World Trade Center exposure, which a lot of us that have worked up there have several ailments. And I just got this yesterday. To date, 241 NYPD officers have died as a result of 9/11 since 18 years. That's 10 times the amount killed on the day of the attack. And 202 FDNY personnel have died since the attack. There's more. They said eventually the numbers of people dying from the cancers and the ailments will surpass the numbers of the people killed on 9/11. So this is Clinton Davis. The only reason they were able to identify him was his gun was still in the holster. That was the way they identified a lot of the police officers' bodies, where as long as their gun was still in their holster and snapped, they would identify it by the serial numbers that were on the gun. Clinton Davis' body was wedged in between two pieces of steel in such a way that the only way they could bring his remains out was to be able to cut his body in half. And they would only be able to retrieve one half of the body, and the rest would fall into the fire pit below. That's what the lieutenant had asked Ron. He said, Chaplain, he says, what part of the body do you think the family would prefer to have, the top or the bottom? And at this point, he wasn't even recognizable, so it's not like they would really be able to tell. So Ron prayed with the lieutenant and advised him the family would just be happy with whatever remains they could get of their loved one back. And he said he prayed with the lieutenant. And I'm standing there, I'm like, yeah, okay, like that's going to help, right? They need a miracle. I now saw the power of prayer at work. As officers cut through Clinton Davis's body, the body had been bloated and full of gases, so he was like a balloon. When they started cutting through, he basically deflated. As he deflated, they were able to pull his whole body out, and they had a whole body recovery at that point of the officers. The site came to a halt, and the officers gathered information to receive Davis's body. It was brought out with a Stokes basket attached to a crane. They basically, at that point, you see that was an actual picture that, I don't know if it was that night or not, but it was that week. He was out there in that very corner, like to the right of his head. That's where his body was, out there. So they had these cranes on the outside that would actually, the booms would come over and they would drop him down, and his body, a Stokes basket for those firefighters know it. It's like it was a mesh basket, and they would attach to the crane. They bring him out. So they brought his body out. So it came to a halt. The officers all backed up, and they filmed like a half square between buildings 4 and 5. Our group started to back away and let the officers have their time with their brother. When they reached back and they pulled us into the formation, it was that night that the PAPD officers accepted us finally as part of their family. We had been with them so long. They pulled us in, and we were there for the recovery and the ceremony afterwards. It was also that night that I felt a bond with these 3 chaplains. This night became very special to me. I wear this bracelet. I've been wearing it for 18 years. I can't even read what it says anymore. It's faded out, but it says Clinton Davis, PAPD, 9/11. I wear it. Just a note, in December of 2001, PAPD officers had a Christmas party for all the children of the officers had been killed. When I was asked to attend and help out, I was carrying some gifts in my hand. I noticed a label on the gift I was carrying. I looked down and it said Clinton Davis Jr. on it. I held on to the present, but the family didn't attend the event that day, so I wanted to be able to give it to them. So in November the following year, I attended a ceremony for fallen officers. Each officer was posthumously honored with a medal, and it was received by a member of the officer's family. A female accepted the award for Clinton Davis, who I approached later and introduced myself, knowing that the family had moved to Texas. I asked if she was a family member. She stated that she was, and that she was Clinton's wife, Daphne. I shared with her that the chaplains had been present in her husband's recovery. I showed her my bracelet, and I let her know that he was surrounded by men of God that evening. That's Daphne Davis there. So it's just things. I had closure in so many different things that happened up there, and this was one to be able to close that portion. Ron left the next day and returned to California, and I spent the next week with Gary and Greg together as they worked with me and Diana. Oh my goodness! One night, Greg asked, "Have you been to God's house yet?" Of course, me and Diana thought, "Oh boy, here we go. Now they're going to drag us into church, right?" But that was not the case at all. Of course, we said no, and they asked. And when we asked, "What are you talking about, Greg?" Greg proceeded to tell us about a discovery that had been located inside one of the ruins of Building 6, the Custom Building. That's the Customs Building. That's where the Secret Service was. Apparently, one of the construction workers had found a steel cross while searching for survivors. So we all go to Building 6, and sure enough, in front of the building, in a large neon spray-painted sign, was this. We found our way into the building, which was pitch black inside. The only light was coming from our flashlights. We walked among the crushed cars, and you could still smell the bodies that would later be found in there. We came to the edge of a concrete pit, basically, and shined our lights into the rubble. Sure enough, there it was, right in front of us, a giant steel cross about 15 foot high. That's the steel cross. You've probably seen it on the news. It's in the museum now. The atheists didn't want it in the museum. They said it didn't belong there. But that cross stayed in there until they finally removed it and brought it out. Not only was there one cross, and the best part, and see, you don't see this because you don't see a whole lot of picture of it. We saw it. That cross was in the middle, and farther back into the pit there where it was were two more crosses that went really high up in the air. And the very top was a cross beam. So when you stood there and looked at it, you saw that cross at the center, and you saw the two crosses on the back, which later, that meant nothing to me at the time, but had I had it, I would have took a picture of that. But it was the crosses of Calvary right in front of us at the time. The cross itself, it was incredible, being the only thing standing there, but the real significance was them three crosses. Later, the cross would be brought out of Building 6 before the demolition of it and was placed outside the site on a concrete support where everyone on the site could see it. That picture at the top was where it was brought out and put up there, and there was I'm not sure what he was, a monk or something, I don't know, Catholic, but he's up there in the corner. The guy on the top left picture, the guy all the way on the left, that's Frank. I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name. It's like Slicheka or something like that. He actually moved down to North Carolina also. He's somewhere down here. He's the one who found the cross, and he was instrumental in helping them get it out, and they brought it out. And then you can see the bottom picture on the right, that's where the cross is now. It's in the museum. If you ever get a chance to go to the museum, you go, because it's very, very well done and it's emotional. We got to go in before the public. They invited all the responders and workers to go up there, and we were able to go in together. We spent every night with these chaplains, and it got to the point where the PAPD officers would see us coming this way, and they would say, "Oh, here comes the God Squad," and that name stuck to this day. We still refer to each other as the God Squad. I would watch them as they prayed before they eat and ask them what that was all about. Gary was talking one night about being in the site, and an officer got saved. I'm thinking that an officer had been located, but soon found out what he was talking about was just his religious stuff. And other than them being Bible thumpers, I took a real liking to these chaplains from San Bernardino. Eventually, they both returned to California, and other chaplains came out from other states to work with us. We became friends with several of them, but not like these three wise men that I referred to them as the wise men from San Bernardino. I told my wife about these chaplains, and there came a time in November that all three would be back in New York together, working with us at the same time. So I arranged for my wife, Kim, to be brought up to New York by the county fire marshals that were working with us. Kim came up, and the first time she got to meet Roland, who she had never met, as well as the three chaplains. It was like the Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy is meeting the Tin Man, the Lion, and the Scarecrow, going down the line. Of course, Gary was, and you're the Scare. He was the Scarecrow. Gary's he's just a little guy. There's pictures of him someplace, but he's not much taller than me. So we went to dinner that night and had a great time. We took Kim to the site, and we had pictures taken. I think I have a picture. I'm supposed to. But that was us when we went out to dinner. That's Kim. So she's got her red, white, and blue jacket on. That's the three chaplains from San Bernardino, going from left as Gary, Greg, and Ron. And I'm still in contact with all these guys to this day. Actually, Greg contacted us today. We try and call on this day, but it becomes a little too emotional sometimes. Greg and Ron left the next day, and Gary would remain behind for a couple weeks. We took Kim to the site that night, where we had been for the past few months. She got to experience a little bit of what we had gone through. Gary asked us if we wanted to go to church the next day. We agreed and met him the following morning. Gary took us into Manhattan to a building that looked like a building that would house offices. We went up in this old elevator and found ourselves in what looked like a ballet studio. It had mirrors on the wall with bars going down it and horizontal bars for the ballet dancers to exercise and all. And I'm like, looking at my wife saying, "Oh my goodness, where's he taking us to, right?" Most of the people were of our age, and they're wearing jeans, T-shirts, and Hawaiian shirts, of course. And I said, "In church?" I was Catholic was the only thing I knew. I was dressed up, but so what kind of church was this? They had guitar players, drums. They played music that I'd never heard in church before, and they had communion in these little cups with grape juice and these little pieces of crackers they would pass around. But we kind of liked it. Ironically, the speaker that day was also from California, and Gary knew him. His name was Raul Reese, and he had quite a testimony himself. Still to this day, I've tried to get the tape from that day, and have not been able to get it because it was such a special day. But it was like just a makeshift place we were in at the time. So I don't think anybody really knows where we were at the time. We went to lunch, and later I drove Kim home. As we were driving down the turnpike, we were just in silence, and finally Kim turns to me out of nowhere, and she says, "I know why now." I looked at her. I said, "Why what?" She replied, "I never understood why you kept going back up there. Now I know why." I learned later that Kim had been struggling with some issues regarding one of my sons, but did not want to tell me due to my work that I was doing up in New York, and she handled the matter with the help of a close friend of mine. I returned to New York later that week, and this would be the last time I would spend with Gary, and probably the last time I could see him. So I thought. It was just me and Gary for a few days that we had. Diana had gotten sick and was taking a break. On this particular day, December 8th, there had been quite a number of recoveries of bodies of firemen, and the Red Cross had asked Gary if he would go help them into the pit with the recoveries, as they were short of chaplains at the time. So Gary headed out with them. I hung out at the temporary morgue with a PAPD officer I become friends with. His name was Rudy. Rudy had only been on the job with PAPD for 3 months when the attack happened, and he was given the job of overseeing the temporary morgue. There was some commotion when Gary called me and said they had found the remains of a PAPD officer, and the body was entirely intact. I stayed at the temp morgue while Gary stayed up in the pit and was there for the recovery. The officer they recovered, his name was John Levi. He had been assigned to the bus terminal in Manhattan. It was just like during the first weeks for the recovery. Everything came to a stop. Motorcycle officers arrived at the temp morgue and prepared to escort to Bellevue. All of the emergency personnel on the site lined up at the temp morgue came to attention and saluted as the remains of Officer John Levy were brought in for positive identification. But there was no question as to who the officer was. Apparently his gun was still in the holster. He was a motorcycle rider, and he had tattoos all up and down his arms, and you could see every tattoo. Apparently he had been encased, almost like entombed in dirt, mud, dust, whatever. He was encased. So his body was almost mummified at the time. So they could tell immediately who he was. They all came to attention and saluted the remains. And Gary and me were then asked by one of the officers if we would like to go with him in his vehicle in the procession to Bellevue, and of course we agreed. On the way to the hospital, every intersection was closed by NYPD, lights and sirens the whole way as we got to the bus terminal. Everyone was on this duty, was standing out in the street at attention, saluting. It was like a moment I would never forget. We arrived at the hospital, and again, we all lined up as Officer Levy's remains were taken into the hospital tent. I then asked by one of the officers I would like to go inside the hospital with the rest of the PAPD officers. And I said, "No, that was your officer. I didn't belong there." And the officer replied, "No, you're one of us," and took me in. Kind of wish I hadn't gone in, because at that point I tried to not view the bodies when they brought them in, because I didn't want to get tainted by what I saw. Diana did when they brought Clinton Davis's body in, and it's still to this day, it bothers her greatly what she saw. I really didn't want to say, but I went in, and I watched as the hospital staff took great care, and they were removing personal items from Officer Levy's bodies, washing his keys, his cell phone, his wallet, and other items. I mean, he had everything on him, so they were just pulling everything out of his pockets. And they were doing this so that they could return everything to the family. They wanted to clean it up and to get him. I could clearly see the tattoos that lined his arms, and his body was perfectly preserved again. I later learned that he had taken a blow to the head, and that's how he died. Luckily, I didn't see his head, so I just saw it from down, so I was good with that. I didn't want to see it. Gary prepared to leave the next day. It was a very emotional time for the few of us, but especially for me, as Gary and I had grown very close. On the way to the airport, Gary talked with Kim on the phone. He was crying. He gave me the phone. She was crying. And of course, I started crying. I again thought this would be the last time I would see my friend. I would later learn how I had been a challenge to him, and how he had shared with his wife about how bad I was. I left Gary at the airport and returned to Journal Square, not really wanting to go into the site that night. Gary called me when he was on a layover in Salt Lake City, and I'm on the phone talking to him. As I'm talking to him, I'm watching this guy walk by, and here it's Ricky Hargrave, the chaplain I had met first, the one that had been in Oklahoma. So I told Gary, I said, "Hey, Gary, Ricky's here." Ricky just walked in. He said, Bob, he said, tell Ricky to finish what I started. What he had started. I hung up with Gary, said a brief hello to Ricky, went back to my room. Again, I heard Gary say, tell Ricky to finish what I started. What had he started? I learned later that all these chaplains were in cahoots together. They were meeting and they were praying over me and really, really working on me. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking of what Gary had said. I finally fell asleep. When I woke up, it was like a light had been turned on inside me. I knew what I had to do. I got up, went directly to Journal Square, found Roland, and asked where Ricky was. And he said that Ricky was getting ready to head out with a team. And he asked why. I told Roland it was personal, that he could tell that something was wrong, and found Ricky for me. Ricky found me and asked, what's wrong, Bob? I asked if we could go someplace private, and we found an empty office to the side. We closed the door, and Ricky again said, what's wrong? I told Ricky what Gary had said to me the night before on the phone, and he just kind of looked at me and said, okay, like he didn't really know what I was talking about. I looked at Ricky, and it just came out, and I said, Ricky, I need to have Jesus in my life. To this, Ricky said, okay, let's do it. We kneeled in that office, recited the sinner prayers, and I gave my life to Christ that day on December 9th. When I finished, me and Ricky hugged, and I heard a voice. And this is where you see God has a sense of humor again. He enjoys a chuckle. And I'm hearing a voice. I'm like, oh, my goodness. I'm like, what am I heaaring, voices now? Is this how it's starting on it? So I look down. It's my phone. I pick up the phone, and I see Greg Smith. And I said, hello. And I missed the slide, but anyway, there's Greg. And I said, Greg. I thought he had called me. I said, Greg, you're not going to believe what just happened. He said, yes, I will. He said, I just heard it. My phone rang here in California. I picked it up, and I heard the whole thing going on in New York. So God made sure one of my three wise men heard the whole thing take place, and then called Gary and told him. I said, remember when I referenced 1 Corinthians in the beginning about, who is Apollos, who is Paul? One waters, one plants the seed, and they all had a part. All these chaplains had a part in what was going on with me at the Trade Center. So I had all these chaplains. I had Ricky, I had Ron and Gary, I had Wes McDuffie from Texas. I had Mark Bardsley down in the corner from Indiana. Dave Kent was from California. So they were from all over the country. They came, and they all had. I felt like they had a mission. They were there for me. I know they weren't, but it just seems like that now because we became great friends. I think God really knew. Like I said, Gary said I was pretty bad. I didn't think I was that bad really, but Gary said I was. So I think God just threw all his heavy hitters at me and just sent them there. So after I got home, we found a church near our house with the assistance of Gary. Of course, it was a Calvary chapel. Both of my sons were involved with the youth group. Both went on mission trips. I found out my wife had given her life to Christ many years ago and reaffirmed herself when I was saved. She became very involved with the ministries of the church, working closely with our pastor's wife as well as the pastor himself, and eventually she became the church secretary. I became involved with the ministry, assisting as an usher, eventually became a deacon. Ironically, May 2006, I myself was ordained and sworn in as a chaplain, in my church so that I could assist the emergency service personnel that I was going out to. I became one of them guys that I loathed so much at first when Roland teamed me up with them. I truly believe that God even used Roland as a way to get to me, and he probably had no idea. I would also begin leading a law enforcement fellowship at our church. Another part of the story that would not be revealed until January 8th of 2002, and is still continuing to this day. It was another Tuesday I would never forget. You see, we were set to close up our office at Journal Square for everyone to take a long-needed rest. January 31st, 2001. Trenton, New Jersey police were involved in a shooting, and a team was requested to respond. I myself was working at the time, but Roland, Diana, and some other team members left New York and headed to Trenton to counsel the officers. We would return a couple days later and meet with them again, myself, Roland, Diana, and a few other members. Monday, January 7th, I spoke to Roland in the evening. In fact, I was on the house phone with Ray Meany, my lieutenant, and speaking with Roland on the Nextel, that one right there. We were joking back and forth, and he was like, all right, Rice, I got to go. I'm going to bed. Right, he hung up, and I'm sitting there with my lieutenant. I said, I'm counting 1, 2, 3. Next thing I hear the Nextel, beep. Yeah, Rice, what? And he said, this would go on. Finally, he said, all right, Rice, I'm going to bed, and we hung up. Next day, I received a call from the vice president of the New Jersey State PBA, which is the Policemen's Benevolent Association, which I was involved in. And he says, Bob, what can you tell me about Roland? I'm thinking, oh, my goodness, what did he do? Roland was a Vietnam vet. I mean, he was a gruff guy. I was like, oh my goodness, what did he do now? Who did he make mad? See, I got to think. I catch myself. I'm thinking, all right, Roland. What does he want me to tell you? He says, what happened? I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what did he do? Again, I'm thinking, I said, I don't know, Tony. What did he do? He says, to that he replied, I just got a call that Roland dropped dead. And that's when I realized that he realized that I had not heard. I didn't know. Roland had been loading up his car at his house for items to be auctioned off for the Burn Foundation at a racing event. Roland was very involved with the Burn Foundation. Was actually one of its biggest contributors. And he was carrying boxes. He had a massive heart attack and died. Dropped dead on the spot. I had a real hard time dealing with Roland's death and was mad. But when I found out some information about Roland, why he had not shared with me, I started to understand why. And again, like I said, Roland had been a Vietnam vet suffering from many health problems related to his exposure to Agent Orange while in Vietnam. I also learned that Roland had been diagnosed with cancer, had been given 6 months to live. That was 3 years prior. Just about the time that we met and became friends, it was said that Roland told the doctor, I'm not going anyplace until I'm finished what I'm doing. Roland put his team together when we arrived at Port Authority. We had about 25, 30 people on the team. Me and Diana met. Roland gave us many tasks to do and left us in charge many times in New York while he took a few days break. When he died, we all thought the team would die also, but boy, were we wrong. Diana and myself assumed command of the team, me as chairman, her as co-chair. The team membership grew to about 200 dedicated to helping others, as we did at the World Trade Center. But now a chaplain was at the helm. And you know what? Only God could have arranged all of this. Roland and me becoming friends, me and Diana meeting in New York, working together, becoming partners with running the team. I would not have been in New York, would not have met the chaplains, would not have been standing here before you now, telling you all what happened. Strangely enough, the day that Roland died, I called the chaplains in San Bernardino. They were all together at a training class, along with some other chaplains who had come to New York with us. This is not something that happens very often, but on this particular day, they were all standing together. They were able to be together when they received the news and they prayed together. Finally, I found out later that Roland had told my friend Gary one day. He said, you know what? You may have gotten rice. He said, but you're not going to get me. Gary, Roland was gruff, cursing, non-believing person, just like I had been before December 10th. Gary told him he was not giving up on him. He would continue to pray for him. Roland had been given a coin by one of the chaplains. That's a copy of the coin. The coin had said on it, committed to praying for you. His girlfriend reported every day when he woke up, he would take everything off his dresser. Both of his phones he carried, the beepers he carried, his keys, and he never went anywhere without them. The day they found Roland's dead body, the only thing he had on his person was that chaplain's coin in his pocket. Did Roland make and accept Christ in his last days or minutes? I want to believe he did. I just believe the feeling that he is overseeing some tasks for the Lord. There sure were a lot of emergency service personnel that arrived in heaven on September 11th. And who else but Roland could make them feel at ease? And now he's up there waiting for us to get there to see us and put us back to work again. In closing, many people died on September 11th. The stories of the heroes, the first responders, as well as the stories of the civilians that stepped up and became saved. There are reports of those that stood, held hands, and prayed, and we can be confident in saying that they are with our Lord. But there are those that never knew the Lord, and even in the hour of their death, they never called out to our Lord and Savior for what their eternity was sealed. I went to the Trade Center on September 14th on a mission to help others, not having any idea what God had in store for me. God waited 40 years before he put his plan of my life into action. He used the devastation of 9/11 to open my eyes. I would like to share Bible verses that become my life verses. Psalm 40:1-3. I waited patiently for the Lord to help me. He turned to me, heard my cry. He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud, the mire. He set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. He has given me a new song to sing, new words, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see what he has done and be amazed. And I'll tell you, folks, many people back in Jersey were amazed at what God did in the life of this person you're looking at right now. And they will put our trust in the Lord. A lot of people still ask the question, where was God on 9/11? I can without hesitation answer that God was present at all locations of the attacks that day. And for me, God was right in the midst of the rubble of what was the World Trade Center. He revealed himself in many ways. He sent his disciples to me from thousands of miles away. With them were my 3 wise men, who brought with them the word of the Lord and his Son, Jesus Christ. My story hasn't stopped yet. How me and my family wound up in a 110-year-old farmhouse in the middle of the country in North Carolina. That's a story for another day. And as I stand here, I've told my wife, I'm going to write a book. Because the things that have happened in 4 years that we've come here, it could be a Hallmark movie. Really, it's just just an example. When we moved into this, we bought this 110-year-old farmhouse. 3 months later, we had Matthew. But we moved in, and I'm sitting reading my Bible one day doing, and I was in the Old Testament, I believe, where either Aaron or Moses was sending the Israelites out to scout the land, and says, go out into the land and bring back the fruits of the land. They go out, and it says they came back with pomegranates, grapes, and figs. Guess what? We got on our property growing pomegranates, grapes, and figs. I'm sitting there, I'm like, are you kidding me? Really? This morning, I just read you my life verse, Psalm 40. I get Greg Laurie's devotional every morning on the email. September 11th, you can look it up. September 11th, today's devotional comes out, and what Bible verse is in there? Psalm 40. Same exact Bible verse. The other day, this wasn't planned, but we were actually coming to church Sunday, and my son Michael's going through a tough time, right? He just got out of the Air Force. He's in college now. He's got this professor who's a real butthead, and he's really having a hard time with him. Hopefully he don't see this. But anyway, my son had responded to a question, and he said, it was something about how America is now. My son wrote there, and he wrote this real long dissertation. But anyway, we were reading. My wife was reading it out loud while we were driving. And my son, in his email, said, "I wish life could go back to the way it was on September 12th." And he just went on, when America was united, and my daughter, 10 years, sitting in the back, she said, I thought that 9/11 was the day, September 11th. We said it is. September 12th was the next day. So I proceeded to tell her on September 12th how it was, how people loved cops, how they loved firemen. We'd be coming out in the morning from our shift, driving down. You're like half asleep, and people are standing on the side of the road with signs. They're handing bottles, food through the windows, and they're clapping and cheering. And it was like you just woke up and like, wow, and to us that were up there, we didn't want that. We were there to do a job. We weren't there to get nothing, but people loved the cops and firemen. Now they hate them. New York, they're throwing stuff at cops. They're throwing stuff at firemen. It's horrible now. But a girl from the team had given me this poem a few years ago, and I posted it yesterday on Facebook. Everybody wants a copy of it now, but it's called One. As the soot and ash rained down, we became one color. As we carried each other down the stairs of the burning building, we became one class. As we lit candles of waiting and hope, we became one generation. As the firefighters and police officers fought their way into the inferno, we became one gender. As we fell on our knees in prayers for strength, we became one faith. As we whispered or shouted words of encouragement, we spoke one language. As we gave our blood in lines miles long, we became one body. As we mourned together the great loss, we became one family. As we cried tears of grief and loss, we became one soul. As we retell with pride of the sacrifice of heroes, we became one people. We are one color, one class, one generation, one faith, one gender, one language, one family. We are the power of one. We are united. We are America. And I said, that was just perfect. And just having that happen the other day, I felt I just had to release it. So in closing, I know most of you in here know, but if you don't know Jesus, man, what are you waiting on? I didn't know him going up there. I didn't know Jesus on September 14th, and I didn't care if I ever knew Jesus on September 14th, to be honest with you. I had no time for it. I had been to a lot of different churches, and I just didn't have no time for any of that nonsense. But another Jesus was revealed to me, another God. And I remember Gary saying early on, there's a God that loves you, Bob. And I'm like, oh, give me a break, Gary. Really? No, but, if you don't know our Lord, and you want to know him, there's a chance. Don't leave here tonight if there's any doubt, that you're not sure where you're going, because, I have friends, and I got to pray with my stepfather hours before he died, and I know that I'll be able to see him again. He accepted the Lord, And that's the only person I've ever prayed with. And I think that God just made sure that happened. And if you don't know him and you want to know him, there's plenty of people here. I'm here. Pastor Ben's here. Pastor Mike's here. I mean, grab somebody. Don't leave here tonight without trying at least to find out what's out there. Because you never know. You could be driving down the road tonight and something happen. You don't want to take the chance of your salvation, not being secured.